We're going to start. Thank you for dedicating some of your valuable lunchtime to come and listen to us pontificate and argue. This is a lunch panel, and you're just as an important participant at the lunch panel as the yahoos sat here on the stage. So those of you hiding at the back, trying to be kind of insignificant and have your little meal or do your email or whatever it is, feel free to come to the front because this is going to be as interactive as we can make it. The goal here is to talk about the future of unit testing. And nobody has the kind of ownership of what that means. So what we've done is invited a bunch of luminaries is the word I was told to use. I'm not sure it's the word I'd have used personally, but luminaries is the word I was told to use to describe the gentlemen here on the panel. My name is Ewan Garden. I'm an architect with Visual Studio Team System. I work on team test, so all your complaints about MS Test should be directed at me, unfortunately, but we'll save for those until after the event. What we're going to do to run this is we're going to give each one of the luminaries about 3 to 4 minutes to introduce themselves and tell you why they should be sat here on the panel, and also to give their vision of where we should be going as an industry with unit testing. I will play some offensive piece of sound to tell them when their time is up. We can have a little secret ballot as to whether we think their time should be continued, you know, thumbs up, thumbs down type approach from the crowd. When we're gone through all the guys on the stage, then we're going to open the floor up. There's a microphone here. If you want to argue, please feel free to. It's perfectly acceptable to call Peter Provost stupid. He does it to me all the time back in Redmond. So him in particular, you can direct anger at.
Yep.
And if you guys have no questions, then we have some good controversial subjects that I will throw at the panel, and we'll get their perspectives on life. So as you hear them talking, think about, well, hang on, no, I do think Peter's an idiot. Or for the one or two of you, yeah, that was a really great suggestion, Peter. I want to put my hand up and say I agree with them. And we'll try and make this as interactive as possible. We'll try and keep everybody awake during lunch. All right? Well, so the first person I'm going to start with, because he's closest to me, is Pele. So why don't you start? Tell us who you are. I'm going to give you 3 minutes on the clock, and then I'll play something offensive from the laptop.
Thank you. So my name is Jonathan Dohaleux, and you can call me Pele. It's easier. I work in Microsoft Research for a tool called PEX. So I started in testing, as a pet project, and you probably know MB Unit. And then I joined Microsoft, worked 2 years in the CLR as a tester. So I kind of, suffered the tester's life. And then I joined PEX 2 years ago, and we're very excited about this new tool that really is going to help you diving and helping you in this unit testing, journey that I've spent 2 years as a tester, and I think unit testing is not as fun as some people say it is. This is the first controversial statement, maybe. Yeah.
First controversial statement, let's record that one. Unit testing is fun.
And, I thought he said it wasn't. He said it wasn't.
Oh, he said it wasn't?
It's not nearly as fun as some of us pretend it is.
I was going to say.
And we really want to help you there. And I guess.
You want to make it fun?
Yeah, I want to make it fun.
You want to make it fun by not having us do it anymore.
Yes, if you don't have to do it, it's simpler. And I guess, yeah, these are my 3 minutes.
That was a minute. You overachieved.
That was a minute. So I meet Ewan every Friday. And,
okay, I was going to say, did you TDD that or something that you overachieved? So, of course, you spoiled my game, Pele, because this is the piece of sound I was going to use to stop you.
You fool! You fell.
Yeah, so
one of the classic wonders.
The fun story about MB Unit is I got an ACL ripped out in my knee, so I was 3 days in hospital with morphine at my hand, so I could code away for 3 days, and basically that's where I wrote the. So
that's how we ended up with MB Unit. You were morphine.
It's morphine-driven development.
I don't know about anybody else, but that explains so much to me.
You know, Pele, I always wondered where the M came from. What's the B?
It was I thought I called it G Unit and realized that it was a rap group, so I had to kind of change the name. And then N was already taken, so you know where I go.
That's Jim's fault.
As you can tell by Pele's hairstyle, he's really not that trendy, so somebody would have had to tell him who G Unit was, probably.
Yeah.
So that was a narrow escape on your part?
Yeah, I'm not really savvy in music.
Not really savvy on music. You got anything else interesting to say about where unit testing should be going in the future?
Well, they should be going to the MSR at PDC booth. That's really well hidden at the back of the main room. We'll show you the
work
future.
at Microsoft, don't you?
All right, you're done.
You fool! fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia.
Okay, Jim Newkirk, you're up.
Hi, I'm Jim Newkirk. I work at Microsoft. I'm a product unit manager at Microsoft. I run the CodePlex website, but that's not why I'm here. So I'm here. About 7 years ago, I actually participated in the beginning of writing NUnit. It was copied from JUnit, and there's this funny story about, how do we know it was copied? Well, the way it was done is we took the .java files and changed them to .cs and see what didn't compile. And some things didn't compile, so we had to change those. But the reason why everyone knows afterwards that it was copied is there's a method in one of the functions or one of the classes called isVaJava, and it was actually in the NUnit code for a long time. And so the answer it returned a bool, so it was false. So it didn't run in Visual Age. So. From there, I wrote, actually, about a year after that, we threw out the entire code base and created NUnit 2.0, which is the first one that had attributes and really kind of thought about how a unit testing tool should work in C#, using the idioms in C#. And so from there, I mean, why I did this, and I didn't get it to get into the lucrative open source software world, but I really wanted I wanted developers to write tests. That's what I wanted. I wanted developers to write tests. For a long time, I saw people who would write code, and the statement they would make is, I just write the code and somebody else will test it because my time is more important than theirs. And so I really wanted developers to kind of take responsibility for what they were doing and using tests to kind of help them design how the stuff actually got used, as opposed to, here, I just create it and then somebody else figures out how to use it. So that was really the reason why NUnit was written. And then from there, kind of, how do we do test-driven development a lot better? In that time, I joined Microsoft, and Microsoft made me stop working on open source software. So I had to give up NUnit, so Charlie Poole took it over, and about a couple years ago, as I said, I work on the CodePlex website. A couple years ago, I got involved with another project because I really wanted to get back to the roots of what we were trying to do, and we created Brad Wilson and I created, and with Peter and a lot of actually other people, created a new tool called xunit.net, which is on CodePlex. You can so I'm actually back in the open source software world, and
yeah, but to get there, you had to basically bring Microsoft to the open source software world.
Well, that was why I went to work for Microsoft. So.
And we're very grateful for it, Jim. Thank you for that.
So the future of unit testing, I just want to, as I said, I want to see developers write more tests. I want developers to be responsible for what they do. And this is a way, the best way that I know right now. If there is a better way in the future, I'll switch to that.
Is that you, Jim?
And do you have something annoying to play?
I do.
Okay.
Surely you can't be serious. I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Peter, you're up.
My name is Peter Provost. I'm currently a program manager in Visual Studio Team System Architecture Edition. But for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been involved in patterns and practices and was kind of one of those Agile robe and sandals guys who speaks at conferences like this about TDD and Agile and all kinds of other things on behalf of PNP and Microsoft. Before going to Microsoft, I was in consulting in Rocky Mountain, Denver kind of region for a long time, and doing Agile consulting and teaching people how to do TDD and things like that. And that's where Jim and I originally met, as he was working on one of his books, and I was an NUnit junkie. I'm going to go right to some of the topics, right? I mean, everybody's been telling about themselves and making funny stories, but the topic here is the future of unit testing. And I think I don't like the word. I've never liked the word, because anytime we start talking about unit testing, what I discover is that we end up arguing over what unit means, and that doesn't have any value to me. It's annoying, and it totally degrades the discussion, because you'll find people who think unit testing is when I test an assembly or when I test what the user's experience of something is, because after all, that's a unit, right? Look, it's a unit of deployment, or a unit of sharing.
What unit means, then the rest of us would be all
well,
right.
Right. If you go and look at the IEEE definition of unit testing, they're very vague and nebulous and say it's any unit of deployment. I'm like, I think that's a pain in the ass. It doesn't help me at all. So I'm with Jim. Developer testing, programmer testing, that's the stuff I care about. And So that's why TDD has always been interesting to me, and that's why very lightweight tools where I operate in the same language in which I code are very natural and friendly to me. Now, as far as future goes, I think actually what I've observed lately is this distressing thing around unit testing and how it's being adopted in organizations and enterprises and management oversight and other strange things. And it often shines up as this thing about code coverage. Who works in an environment where they say you got to have code coverage numbers? Look at that. Yeah, doesn't it suck?
I have a tip.
What?
So you just write tests without asserts in them. And
No,
you can
you
increase the
so,
code coverage
no,
dramatically.
No, you use Pelly's tool to generate 100% coverage. You
you.
comment out all the asserts, and then your manager goes away. Now, this is what has been annoying me about it, is I've observed in places that I've worked this interesting thing where people start to focus on the code coverage number. And they stop focusing on the intent of unit programmer, developer testing. And that's the developer validating that what they're about to build or have just built does what they think it's going to do. That's what I think unit testing and programmer testing is all about. I didn't know you were here. And so that code coverage thing has been driving me absolutely bonkers, and it's just been getting more and more in my head lately. So I think the future of unit testing is actually looking a little bit disturbing to me, because I think what we're going to see is we're going to see more and more of a push towards this quantitative measure of if we've got it covered, we must have done our job, instead of developers embracing it the way I've embraced it and the way others have embraced it as a design tool and as a way of taking the scientific method type thinking and applying it to the development you're doing. So you either get people who say, hell no, I'm not doing it. I'm trying to give him enough time to actually interrupt me. Hell no, I'm not doing it because I'm not a tester. Or you get people who say, I've got a code coverage number I have to deal with, so I'm just going to hack my way into it and make the problem go away. And that's
I wouldn't
kind of
trust this overgrown pile of microchips any further than I could throw it.
Oh, and I'll just give Jeff some fodder when it's his turn. I really don't like mock object frameworks either.
So Peter, we were going to save the controversy for the second half of the presentation.
I saw Casalino sitting there, and I had to. I didn't realize he was here. It was just reaching for me to go.
You just couldn't resist?
No, I couldn't resist.
Okay, that's okay. Why don't you hand off to Nikolai? For those people stood at the back, there's plenty of space at the front. You can feel free to come forward. We won't make fun of you as you walk forward. For those of you people hiding at the back, we will make fun of later for coming in and sitting at the back. Nikolai, you're up.
Hello, my name is Nikolai Tillman. I'm in Microsoft Research. I joined 7 years ago. And initially I've worked on program analysis tools, building compilers and tools that find errors in program text. Think of FXCOP. But then these tools give you warnings. Here something might go wrong, maybe. So don't you sometimes wish that you had some test case, concrete values that actually show really what can go wrong and you can debug it? And so at that point I had the idea of taking all these techniques that are used in static analysis and use them for test generation. And the result of that is the PEX project that I started 3 years ago. Peli already mentioned that. And yeah, little advertisement, come all to our Microsoft
No
Research
more
booth.
advertising.
And there's a talk on Thursday. Okay. So the idea is basically that you can write parameterized tests. And
no more advertising. Future of unit testing.
This is the future. Okay, this is the future.
The future is the thing you're demoing on your booth 15 minutes after the session finishes.
Yeah. But so the current way of writing unit tests is too restricted. It forces you to do things which are not really what you want to do. So part of the future is having more parameterized tests. And then just to counteract the other point we've just heard about code coverage. So there is no future in unit testing if we don't have code coverage. So code coverage by itself isn't when we should go home. But if our tests don't achieve code coverage, then our assertions don't really test our code, do they?
How's the view from up there?
Excellent. Come to our booth.
Go ahead. Make my day.
All right, you're done, Nikolai.
All right, so I'm Jeff Brown. I work at yellowpages.com in San Francisco. And I currently lead a tools and automation team. So right now I'm very much steeped in build and deploy type systems, infrastructure, testing, and all that fun stuff. I also lead 2 open source projects, MBUnit and Galio. So I've I took over MBUnit from Andrew Stopford, who took it over from Paley over on the end there, and we're doing MBUnit version 3. Which is this great extensible unit testing framework, but it intends to do a lot more than that as well. So we've discovered that a lot of people like to use a unit testing framework as a harness for launching off into integration testing or system testing or other activities. And as a result of that, we actually forked off a part of this project to create something we call Galileo, which is a test framework neutral automation platform. So you can write your own test frameworks and leverage Galileo, and then you get free integration with all sorts of tools like Visual Studio and ReSharper and PowerShell, MS Build, NANT, and all that fun stuff. So we're very much looking at building up infrastructure to make it easier for people to get testing off the ground. Now, as far as the controversial stuff is concerned, so we've talked about developer testing and unit testing, and how many people believe that this should drive your design. And in fact, simply having a short feedback loop in your design and development processes improves your design. And as you write tests, you very quickly identify, problem issues. Oh, I can't write a test to do this thing, which is some major feature or some interesting edge case that I haven't handled yet. So you fix the design and you move on. But ultimately, to get this stuff out into the organizations, I believe we have to divorce automated testing from its methodologies and teach people automated testing methods, including unit testing, but then also teach them improved practices and conventions. So you can grow into a test-driven development or behavior-driven development mentality if you like, if your organization will support that. But you're not then barred from being in the cool club with all the kids who do unit testing and find it effective.
Inconceivable!
Actually, I got it.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Right.
So my name is Ted Malone, and actually before I get started, I do need to clarify something. Ewan said that there's a bunch of yahoos down here, and actually I'm more of a live search kind of guy, not a yahoo, but that also means I can't find anything most of the time.
Ooh. Low.
Right? But so I'm an architect for a company called Configuresoft, and we build systems management tools that are in use by a lot of very large companies. And I run a business intelligence team. I've got a bunch of developers that work for me around a business intelligence product that we deliver to the field. And we actually just this morning went live at 9 o'clock this morning, had the wire where it was OEM'd by EMC for their stuff, and they're doing a lot of sales around that. And that's actually an interesting thing, because I have been for probably the last 4 years pushing agile database development and agile business intelligence. Matter of fact, that's the name of my blog, is Agile Business Intelligence, portal.sqltrainer.com. And the interesting thing that I find about that is database guys typically are never talked about in any of these panels. Business intelligence people, the unit testing, what the heck is that? What's that all about? But I can tell you, the product that we just OEM'd this morning, whenever we had the acceptance testing by EMC's team, and they took everything over, they found a total of 3 what they called serious bugs that were basic showstoppers. 2 of the 3 were because the interface changed on their side and they forgot to tell us about it. And then the
Never
third
happened. Never heard of that.
Yeah,
That's
never
why you
happened.
need tests to
And
verify.
your tests found it, right?
Yeah, we actually had all of our testing and everything was
you're using
built around
mods.
it. Built around all of the fun stuff that they had delivered as part of their interface when they said, oh, well, we're changing that interface at the last minute. And then the last one was a very interesting one, and I think probably the big controversy that we'll talk about, at least from my perspective here, it's when you think about unit testing and you think about test-driven development, it's really important that you understand what it is that you're testing and building. Because if you don't, you end up with tests that are perfect until the very end when the consumer goes, hey, that didn't work when I pushed that button. So So that's really, from a database perspective, something that is a very interesting challenge to work around and work with. And it's great that we have all these frameworks, MB Unit, In Unit, all these great things. We've got all these great tools out there. But I don't know how many of you here develop business intelligence or database solutions. And it's kind of like we're out in the cold sometimes for some of this stuff. And Gert's team is doing a lot of work to bring the database developer. Uh-oh.
You're done. All right, we wanted to try and keep the intros down a little bit, but hopefully now you have a feel for who is on the stage. Before we start, I wanted to get a feel for the audience. By the way, there are still seats at the front, all of those of you who are shy at the back. For where your background is, before we start throwing hand grenades and punches here on stage, as you've seen the hints have been going already. How many people in the audience, when they write code, religiously unit test? So you write your unit tests of any shape or form. Raise your hands. So about 70%. How many people do TDD in the audience? All right. So I'm going to throw out some questions. These guys are going to throw questions at each other. If you feel like you want to contribute, as I said, calling Peter an idiot, if in case I didn't say that earlier, that's just fine. Just come stand up at the microphone and we'll prioritize your feedback so you can give us a chance to get involved. I have some very tacky, free Microsoft giveaway stuff here that if they think the question is any good, then we'll give you something free and tacky because you didn't get enough of it already at the show. So the first question I want to throw out to the guys on the panel to get their perspectives on, and try not to talk over each other too much or make the punches hurt too much, is mock object frameworks. Essential tool or spawn of the devil?
I'll take that one.
Well, no, I think everybody's going to get a shot at this one, Pelly. You can go first.
Yeah, go first. Give us some ammo. Come on, go.
So we think in our team that most object framework over-abuse features that were not designed to be used by mock frameworks. So I mean, I'm saying about expression trees, reflection event, all the magic they're doing. So they're over-abusing the language, and it's not much easier in a sense. There's still the problem that you need to set up a scenario and write all this code and this expectation and everything. We think that the future is going to be about providing models. You write a simplified model of your environment, and then you can use it over and over again in your test. Right. So that is the future. It's not a funky syntax. It is models.
Let's go with either Mr. Provost or Mr. Newkirk. I suspect you may have an opinion on this subject.
Do you want to hate it or me?
You go first.
Actually, I don't know if there's spawn of the devil. I think the underlying platform itself causes the need for the mock object framework. So that you have to do this, right? If your tests, we could get into definitions of unit testing, which would be very, very boring. But if you think about isolation, the only way to do isolation is to isolate your code away from all the other things that it has to depend on, and that's where mock object frameworks come in. I personally don't like them. I would prefer a stub framework because anytime, I think about stubs versus mocks, and as I said, we'll get off into nonsense. But anytime you have your mock object framework, does an if, it's gone too far in my mind. So like if you build a mock thing that sometimes returns these values, sometimes returns this, okay, forget it. I'd much rather create very, very simple stubs, create them in the test, and then move on. When I see expect, do something and then verify, I cringe. That's what drives me crazy. So most of the mock frameworks I don't use in that way.
All right, so I'm going to agree with Jim, in particular with respect to the bit about the problem is the platform. Like if we look at interesting prototype-based languages or dynamic programming languages, we can look at Ruby or Lua or any of those other things. You don't need these frameworks. Okay? You just don't need them. You isolate something by just cutting it off. And you can do that no problem because everything's very loosely connected anyway. So we have this framework, this platform where everything's so tightly bound and dependent on each other, and you can't break them apart, and you can't compile, and you can't inspect it, and you can't ask it any questions. So of course we've got to build these crazy-ass frameworks that let me get in there. 6-7 years of doing this stuff, I've never found myself needing a mock object framework. And more often than not, when I find people thinking they need them or expressing a huge dependency on them or a massive desire for having them, what they really want is they want to be lazy. And I'm okay with lazy, like that lazy fourth lazy form thing and all that. I'm okay with that. But what they really want is they want to be able to say, oh, I'm too lazy to implement that interface. It has too many methods on it. And I just want to say dynamic mock around my interface, or whatever the construct of the day is, Daniel. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
No, you don't get to speak again, Pelly.
We should probably invite David on stage so somebody tells he likes mock framework. It's not gonna. It's going one way right now.
Yeah, we'll give you your turn in just a second. But all that said, I think they're useful. I think they're very useful for certain kinds of problems. But when I hear somebody say I need to be able to dynamically implement a mock around this interface and the interface is too complex, I'd start saying, yeah, your interface is too complex. Stop. Right? Don't fix it by wrapping a mock object framework and moving on. Your interface is too complex. And so what I've observed is people start to take these dependencies on these mock frameworks that let them cheat the design and let them sneak past that problem and just move on with the other thing they're trying to get done, which is all well and good from the pragmatic get your code done perspective, right? But ultimately it leads to big ball of mud, it leads to design decay, and it leads to crap that you've got to try to maintain next year, or if you're lucky, give to some other poor schmuck to maintain next year. Is that time? Did you kick me off?
I think you're headed towards soapbox territory. It would be good to have somebody else
I thought that's what you wanted.
Yeah, I guess it could have somebody else speak sometime in the next 20 minutes. Jeff, just hold on as we actually have somebody from the audience who is going to have to introduce himself for us before he's allowed to speak.
Yeah, hi. I'm Daniel Casolino. I used to work with Peter in Patterns and Practices. I actually used to do unit testing, but not TDD, and I started doing TDD just when Peter joined Patterns and Practices, so I learned it there. And Peter, you probably remember from the code base in the Composite UI application blog that we worked on together.
Hold on, you cheated. You cheated. You didn't finish the introduction. Daniel's also the guy who wrote the new favorite mocking framework of the world, MOQ.
MOQ, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, and if you remember the code base from the Composite UI application blog, we didn't use a mock framework because Peter didn't like the mock frameworks.
You're saying that Peter didn't let you use one?
No, he didn't want, and he was the dev lead, so he said, no way we're going to use one. And that's fine, because back in the day, all the mock frameworks used magic strings for like invoking the members and all that. So it was crazy for refactoring and anything. So it was not useful at all. But the fact of the matter is we had to write a lot of boring stuffs here and there, just saving flags and, oh yeah, when I invoke this interface, I will return like null and then test for an exception that has to be thrown and blah, blah. It was very boring code. And I kept doing that on and on and on and just looking for a way to avoid, and honestly, to be lazy. I don't want to write that stupid code over and over, right? And I agree with that what you usually need is just a stub framework. But again, most people don't even get the difference between a stub, a fake, a test double, or a mocker. You know, that distinction is so useless. I find it like, I don't care what the name you put on it. I need something that I can configure dynamically so that it returns something that I need, or maybe it throws an exception that I need, or, you know. But I agree that verifying the mock is something of a smell. I typically use mock, the framework we built, as a stub more than a mock. But again, I don't care about the name, and that's why people like get and read Fowler's article and say and get religious on, oh no, this is a stub, no, this is a fake, no, this is a mock. Come on. So I don't know what you think, but I just wanted to answer on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. You look desperate to say something.
Okay, I wanted to take this in a slightly different direction, which is that some people do overuse mocks, and they find that they write expect this, expect that, expect this, expect that, and this is, you know, telling you, well, just how coupled you are to the behavior of some other interface. And you could be, you know, depending upon some rather non-trivial interface with a non-trivial lifecycle, and you find that you have to do these things. But one of the things that this highlights, and I want to come back to like database testing things, is some people want to do stuff like mock out the database. And this to me sounds like a completely ridiculous idea most of the time, because there's actually a great deal of complexity in that interface. We have, you know, code that is communicating. We got different modules. We got our code, our application code, and our database code, and they talk to each other. And there's a whole lot going on in between. There's a whole lot going on behind the scenes, and you have systems that actually are dependent on state. And so one way you can address this problem is to say, well, let's try to isolate everything, right? I don't like dealing with a system that might be in flux that I don't control, so I'm gonna isolate that, and I'm not gonna include that, the behavior of that component in my test. I will mock it out, I will stub it out, or whatever, right? But this kind of neglects the reality of a number of systems where, no, what you're building is coupled to like interesting behaviors of the file system or the network stack or of the database itself or some other tool which would be very difficult to extract. So you can isolate yourself from these bits, but then you still have to test the glue that you use to bind it later on again. So my issue with mock object frameworks is simply that some people try to abuse them and miss out on what the real problem is, which is that they need to have an integration test somewhere across that interface, and they're beating their heads against the wall trying to figure out how to make this mock object framework do what they need, finding it doesn't work, and not really testing what needs to be tested, which is the integration.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Em, do you want to jump on the microphone?
I did want to add one more thing, danger-wise.
As it's you, Jim, we'll let you off.
Okay, thanks. One thing I noticed in early versions of the MVC framework, which actually is very good from a testing perspective, is they used a mock object framework to do some of their testing. And since I don't use them, my first kind of initial reaction was, okay, I want to write tests in MVC, and I found myself having to stub out about 20 different things. And it was because they used the mock object framework that actually hid all of those dependencies. And so I think it can be dangerous when you're building a framework to think of, it's like, oh, I'll just always depend on mock object framework, because it can hide the fact, and the way it hides it is, this method returns null, this method returns null, this method returns null. So the mock object framework is actually hiding all of these kind of intricate dependencies that weren't exposed because the framework was hiding them.
All right, so before you go on, you said spawn of the devil, and I don't think it is, because I don't think the mock object framework is inherently evil. But I want to, there's a theme brewing here, and I think we're not far from each other on this one, even maybe Daniel, is that ultimately the problem that I was complaining about is in the patterns in the design and in the behavior of developers after you've used a mock object framework for an extended period of time. Right? So what Jim was just describing is that the use of the framework allowed the developers to kind of not have to see this design flaw that was brewing, because it simplified the problem. So great, simplified the testing problem for them, but ultimately they ended up with this 20 stub environment that they couldn't get around. So now suddenly you can't test it without the mock framework, and you end up with this progressive thing. And I think so. The frameworks aren't the spawn of the devil, but they can lead you to do really nasty things. So that's about where I'll go.
Okay, I got to kill this one off so we can get on another subject. Guy Smith Barrier, go for it.
So do any of you guys use virtualization for testing on different platforms? Also automating the testing of different platforms?
So when you say use virtualization, give an example of using virtualization.
So my world is internationalization, and I use virtual server to fire up French Windows, German Windows, Windows 2000, Japanese Vista, and then I run my unit tests on that environment. And that's like 20 virtual machines. I can't do that physically. It has to be automated and do it with virtual machines. Do you guys do that at all?
Right. So from our perspective, that's exactly what we do with the...
Nice catch.
I think to get an answer, you actually have to catch the terrible swag there. But yeah, that's
sorry.
Right. That's right.
I believe I said cheap and tacky, not terrible when I'm discussing swag.
Sorry. But that's exactly what we have to do, because in our environment, in the business intelligence world, we're dealing with data sources that in some cases are uncontrolled or unknown. So we use the virtualized environment to spin up things like, this SAP server over here, or this type of environment over here, this Remedy help desk over here, that kind of stuff. And we have to do that because, first of all, we couldn't afford the infrastructure to deal with it. And secondly, we don't really control that environment, but we still have to work within it and test it. And so virtualization is the way that enables us to do that.
And is that virtual server or VMware, or what are you doing?
It's actually a little of both. We've got some Hyper-V stuff. We've got some ESX server stuff. We've got a little bit of virtual PC because it's a little easier to maintain in some cases.
I'm going to cut this one quickly short. Just one from Microsoft perspective. We use virtualization a lot for platform testing, particularly languages. And I'm glad that everybody's here in this session, but you're actually missing a session right now on virtualized lab management. We have a new product called Virtual Team Lab. So when you get back home, go take a look at it online if you're interested in virtualization. Okay, we have somebody else. No, you didn't get to speak, Pelle. You said too much at the beginning.
Hello. I think I'm going to speak against the grain of the podium here, but we are pretty heavily using mocking for a lot of things, but mainly also for behavior-based testing, behavior-driven testing, where we really say, okay, I expect this method to be called, but it's completely irrelevant to me what the method actually does. Just, it should execute. For instance, it doesn't even have a return value. I just want to verify that it executes, that my interface is called, and therefore the behavior would then be executed. So how does this go with not using mocking frameworks?
Testing that problem is 4 lines of C# code. I don't see why I need the framework to do it. I create my stub derived from the interface in the method, stash it off in a variable that it got called, and I use my stub. It's not a problem. It's 4 lines of code.
But it's extreme overhead.
It's not overhead. It's in my unit testing framework. Who cares? Okay, so now we're getting to boring. You guys have all brought up boring about a half a dozen times. Okay,
Actually,
so apparently what's wrong with unit testing and the future of unit testing is that it's boring. Okay, I'm sorry. It's boring.
Everyone extracts
So what
out,
we need to do is we need to make the coolest, funnest unit test framework that like 3D graphics and sex and stuff. That's what it should be.
That's exactly what it should be.
Yeah, see, I win. Where's my shirt?
So I had
the
to say this.
future of unit testing is about sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
I hate to say this, Peter, but in some sense, a mock framework is a step into that direction. Because if you don't have it, you have to write these imperative C# code, set flag here, read it there. And mock frameworks make it more declarative, right?
Exactly.
It's not just shorter to write with fancy syntax, but you don't need to write down so much stateful behavior. But
I'm going to hold this one because I think we're about to start going around in circles. Yes. Let's see if somebody else has another question further back.
Okay. Okay.
No, sir, that was yours to keep. we have more than 2 of them to give away.
There'll be a test at the end that you have it.
Sir, you're up. Make it quick.
Okay, sorry. With regards to testing, I've found that a lot of times the kind of code that is lovely to test is a case where you have, say a function that you give it input, gives you output. There's no problem. It's just regular pure function. It's lovely to test. I love it, right? And I find a lot of times where mocking and unit testing gets painful is when I'm dealing with functions that have side effects, and particularly when you're dealing with asynchronous logic where you've got all these events coming from all different directions. You've got to make responses to those events. And right now, the best solution I have is to use mocking frameworks with expectations that do stuff, just because I find doing it manually and setting the various flags to be kind of hard sometimes to figure out exactly what happened. With the mocking framework expectations, if they fail, at least I have a stack trace pointing to the location. I don't really like it, but it seems to be the best of a lot of bad solutions, in my opinion.
Okay, Pelle, I'll let you answer this one because we're going to keep Peter under control temporarily.
I think you raise a point, and I'll maybe go away from the mock problem here. Unit testing is going to face a major challenge with the multi-core revolution coming up. And imagine that you're going to be able to write concurrent code very, very easily with the TPL and peeling, and you're going to have to unit test that. C# has side effects, as you say, and asynchronous is just another impersonation of this problem now. your test is not deterministic. So the future of unit testing, has to deal with that in some way. So yeah, that wasn't about the mock.
But that's okay, because we've been trying to get off mocks for the last 2 rounds, so that's good.
Well,
so I'm going to try and move it on so we don't just have an entire session.
I wasn't going to talk about mocks.
Pardon?
I wasn't going to talk about mocks.
You've got a minute to not talk about mocks.
I'm not talking about mocks. No mocks. So there's never been a problem testing nice, clean, deterministic code, right? It's got inputs, it's got outputs, it's side effect free, it's functional. Hell, that's great. But there's always been this problem testing stateful things. So in my opinion, at least, the future of unit testing has to incorporate more of these hard problems, testing stateful things which are unavoidable. Right, and it's not going to be mocking. It's not going to be. Yeah, I'm done.
That wasn't me, honestly. I was listening, but it's okay because we'll move on. Sir, thank you for your question. If it's about mocking, I'm going to ask you to go away and come back later.
No, it's not about mocking. Don't
okay,
worry.
Go for it, please. Anything other than mocking.
My question is actually about integration and acceptance testing. I've been doing TDD for 4 or 5 years now, and I'm a big fan of it. But when it comes to integration and acceptance testing, I find that to be a lot more painful to manage and deal with, especially with tools like Fitness. Jeremy Miller has a tool called Storyteller that promises to be pretty cool. I was wondering where you guys see integration testing, acceptance testing fitting into the future of unit testing, et cetera.
Let's pick on Jim, because he looks like he doesn't want to answer this one.
Oh, all right. Well, I used Fit. I've used Fit for a long time, and I've never used Fitness, but I used to work with Bob. So I do think, all those tools are not perfect. I mean, and I'm not looking for the perfect tool, but those tools have a lot of...
NUnit is.
Oh, yeah, no. It's not, because that's why I did do xunit.net. But and that's why Pele had to do MBUnit. But the mismatch is actually much larger, I think, in the acceptance testing world than it is at the programming level. So that I find all of them have interesting compromises that force you, like I can't take an existing application and say I'm going to use Fitness on it, because I really have to architect the application in such a way that it interfaces with Fitness really well. And so Codeplex uses Watton, a tool called Watton. I've used Silk testing before in the past. I've used Fit. I keep trying them because I don't like any.
Green pepper, that's another one.
I haven't tried that one, but I keep trying them because I don't like any of them.
I don't like green pepper.
Yeah, I haven't really found any.
Jalapenos are good.
So
that's why I didn't want to answer, because I've tried a lot of them, and I can't give. I mean, in an ideal world, you would have. In a sense, acceptance test-driven development, which is I can write an acceptance test and then implement it, and then everything would, in an ideal world, that would be the case. I don't see the tool yet that would allow me to do that.
Yeah. Let's talk about modeling for a second.
Just hold on one second,
Yeah.
Jeff.
Sure.
Technically, we've got like 2 minutes left.
2 minutes.
The next speaker's not until 1:15. Given that we've actually got some people stood up here, and this seems to be a fairly kind of interactive conversation on stage, we'll keep running this session. A couple of these guys may have to leave until 1 o'clock to give the next speaker time to come on stage. So if you're leaving because you think we're about to be done, we're not about to be done. We'll keep going as long as there's stuff to talk about. So Jeff, off you go.
Yeah, so quick comment about integration testing, acceptance testing. One of the big problems that you end up with is that you try to map your nice big stateful application, which is complete, it's a big black box, into something that you can test. And part of what you need to do that is an effective way to model the application and the application's behavior and the application's domain in such a way that tests can talk about what the application is doing. And without digging down into, oh well, I'm pushing a button on this form and whatever. Ultimately, yeah, you have to push a button on some form to cause a behavior to occur, but that shouldn't be the focus of your test. So something like Fit tries to abstract that away by, we'll define these tables, we'll create verbs that perform high-level operations, but I think it actually tries to dumb it down a little bit too much because not everything fits well into a list of tables. So one of the things.
Who wants to edit HTML?
But one of the things I've been looking at doing, actually, I'm planning to build a new tool I haven't really announced to anyone.
Here it goes. Here it goes.
Yeah, look, Jeff, nobody's really paying attention, and it's not like anybody's going to watch it after the fact on the video. So you should be fine. Whatever it is, tell us. Nobody will share, right?
So I'm planning to build a new tool, and this is based on some things that we've learned at yellowpages.com with our integration tests. So one of the things that we did immediately for our web tests was to build a model of the site, of the website, right? And basically this is just a collection of classes that represent pages, and you've got methods to perform various behaviors. You know, it's very, very simple and dumb. But now we're actually looking at some more interesting scenarios where we want to capture the domain, right? The thing that the test is manipulating is actually a user in the environment. That user has some kind of account with maybe some money in it and a balance, and we perform transactions through the website that should update this hidden state that the application holds. This is a stateful application that we're testing, end-to-end black box. So we can't just, shut it down and start it up again all the time because that's going to be expensive to, pre-populate with all the data we need. So instead, what we can do is store a representation of what we think the application state is, and keep track of that and how it should be modified by various behaviors. And then we can start expressing our tests in terms of the domain. So we want to add money to a user's account, and we can map that function on the domain to a set of concrete behaviors, which actually click on some web forms and do whatever, and then update some state. And now we can go verify that, and we have a persistent record of what we think the user should look like. So this is just model-based testing. But I've also been looking at scenarios where we have multiple actors. So one of the complications with our system is that we have people who use a web application and a telephone-based application simultaneously, and there are events going on in different these different modalities.
Jeff, I'm going to.
But we need a representation for actors, essentially concurrent actors in the system.
I'll interrupt him. He was trying to move you on.
Let's move on. We have more questions from the floor.
Okay, let me link into that maybe a little bit. I see there's a big hole between requirements and unit tests, and I want to see what you guys think about ways that can be addressed in the future.
Anyone want to take it first?
I think requirements are up here and unit tests are down here.
Well, yeah,
and if the hole is this, well, okay, then you got acceptance tests, functional tests, blah, blah, and all the code in the middle.
Yeah.
So I don't see that gap, but I think there may be a gap in getting from requirements into meaningful acceptance tests and those higher order tests. But you heard me say at the beginning that from my perspective, unit test, developer test, programmer test is all about me making sure the next 5 lines of code I write do what I expect. That actually is so far removed from a user requirement as to be unmappable and untraceable. And that traceability doesn't bother me in the slightest.
I don't think I agree with that at all, because
that's what I wanted to get, the controversy.
but that's exactly the problem that we see, especially in the database world that we're living in, because that's exactly the problem. When you try to do test-driven development, you got to know what you're going to test, because you're going to build it, and you got to have that requirement that tells you what you're working with.
Yeah, you've got to minimally know that domain, and then I think going back to that short iteration cycle is highly important in that process.
And that's exactly it. And finding a way to divorce the developer from that need, while at the same time preserving the chain.
The developer is actually not divorced from that need, but that need is expressed 1,000 different ways in the code. Okay, and what unit testing is attempting to do is to say, here, I need to build this, and this is part of this bigger whole. I'm not saying you're divorced from it, but the requirement of I need to be able to do this and how that actually gets mapped into the software are two very, very different things.
A test that tests a brick does not have to know how to test a building. And it doesn't have to know you're going to use it in a building. It's testing a brick.
To a certain degree,
Next question.
My problem is with components. I've got one component, it talks to a bunch of other components, sometimes through WCF, sometimes TCP, sometimes REST, sometimes FIX, sometimes via a database. And it seems like there's no frameworks, no tools out there to model those other components. And when are we going to see a good way to say, okay, I don't want to use the real version of this check credit calculator, but I still want to do the service call. I want to mock it at a higher level outside my code.
You should throw out your component.
You're going to
the
say
component
it does
all
too much.
those things?
It does so many things.
So this relates to what I said in the beginning, that currently you are really restricted in how you can write unit tests. You have to write down all the little things that have to happen at the boundary between your code and the database or whatever. And you should be able to be more vague. I mean, so at certain places, it doesn't really matter what a function returns, but it should be non-null. Why do you have to spell out everything in all the details?
Well, I need to test more than just did the value return from the function correctly. I need to test the communications. What happens when it times out? What happens?
Write an integration test.
Yeah.
A lot of these kinds of conversations are talking at different levels, and we didn't want to go into this differentiation between the levels of testing, but a lot of the questions that you guys are saying, oh, it's really hard to do that with unit tests. Yes, because it's not a unit test. What we're talking about here are integration, acceptance, functional tests at a much higher level. And to go back to the whole modeling thing that you started poking on, and I know you've poked on before, tests that happen higher up the stack are probably not appropriate for being done with unit testing tools. And if you look at FIT, okay, FIT was bastardized for the last 10 years because when Ward Cunningham created FIT for the Chrysler project, it was to do accounting software. Who's surprised that they look like tables with accounting numbers in them? It's a DSL for accountants, and I don't mean DSL like Visual Studio means DSL. I mean DSL like we used to mean when we all used Lex and Yak to compile languages. DSL, look, tables, accountants, grids, numbers. Of course that's what it looks like. Now people bastardize it and say we're going to use it for testing a UI. No, create a new DSL to do that, a new model, whatever you want to call it. That model operates in the language of the domain. Now your problem is about communicating things. You need a new language to describe that, a new model.
Pele, I'll give you one shot, and then let's move on.
You should be able to model the communication channel and basically model those behaviors that you care about. Timeout. You can make, with our tools, you could make a choice. Why don't I throw timeout here? Does it matter in the code? Is there some special behavior in your code to deal with that, right?
Right, but now you assume it won't ever throw you something like Win32 exception.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
So components don't necessarily always perform the spec. In fact, usually they don't, and they break in all sorts of interesting ways that are not documented, but you still have to deal with. And so you can model stuff up the wazoo, but in the end, you still have to put the components together and see how they play, and you still have to work around actual issues in the implementation of the component that aren't specified in the interfaces or anywhere else.
I totally agree. In the end, you have to try it out in the real world. But I think right now, the mock frameworks, they actually make it hard. So so whether you write an abstract model or a really concrete scenario, you have it now in your test, and you would like to try it out in the real world, but it's this mock code, and it only runs in this mock setting. You cannot turn it into a real database. Why? I think that's just a deficiency and something that should change in the future. So one should be able to take a model or mock and turn it into reality and then run it for real. So for TDD, you want the really tight cycle. You want to run with a small model or mock. But then in the end, I want to take all of these tests and run them for real.
Okay. I would like to make one more point. When you're making tests over like WCF calls or to a database, it's not really that expensive. You're not talking like changing your test from a few seconds to 20 minutes or an hour. You're changing it from a couple seconds to 3 or 4 seconds.
I need my whole harness to run in 12 minutes. I'm sorry, I can't afford a second.
10.
I can't afford a second for a test.
Let's move on to the next one. I'll let you guys over there. Feels like you're going to have to go fight at Starbucks or something. Peter will adjudicate.
All right, so my problem is I've got this huge honking steaming pile of legacy code, and not really a lot of opportunity to go through and refactor it. So it's some long-term project. So one of the tools that I've been finding very handy, we're using the Microsoft unit test. So I've been using the private object to get access to a bunch of the private data, and some of my coworkers are basically throwing holy water at me and presenting the cross.
Mentioning MS Test, by the way, you definitely get one of these. First person to do so in an hour's presentation.
Gone down the dark path.
Hey, Jim and I can bless some more holy water over
private
here.
We're looking at
it. Keep going, though.
But the
Pelly's chomping at the bit to speak, so keep going.
so I mean, we've got sort of this dilemma of, I can't really go into rebuilding all this stuff until I know that it's going to work, which means I need to be able to have a test around it. And the only way to test it is to get access to private stuff that means that the tests are going to break when I change some of the implementation.
Did you realize how many fires you just set off on stage with one statement there?
Actually,
I
there wasn't enough controversy. I was going to suggest that you use PECs.
You need to talk to Pelly.
You need to use PECs.
There's multiple aspects in your question. There's dealing with that legacy code. There's also dealing with private methods. I won't go into the private stuff, right? It's too hot for me.
Yeah.
But the legacy code is very, very relevant. It's really easy to start from scratch, but it's rarely the case. We think we have something that will help you. We think there's going to be a lot of automated testing there, and that's where we're going to achieve, coverage and hardening the legacy code. We don't think you have the money when you have a project to go back, shut down your development for 6 months, and write tests for all the crap you've written the last 10 years. So you'll need help from the machines, and we have all those cores on your servers. They are not just for playing music.
I will say before Jim and Peter get on this one, you will see less emphasis from Microsoft on the private accessor technology going forwards, because from an implementation perspective, it's actually really hard to do. We have to pull all sorts of dirty tricks to do what we do, and if you've got WCF code or complex code with different types of generics, we actually don't generate valid accessors for you. And so,
we win.
Yeah, by default, Peter. No, I happen to agree. I happen to agree with Jim and Peter on this. That it's an interesting technology and it's helped some people who are starting to get going in unit testing. But from my perspective, we've taught a lot of people bad practices, and now we're going to have to help people unlearn that. Now we're not going to take the technology out. It's in VS 2010. You can go play with it on the CTP. But as it stands, we're not going to enhance it going forwards. And at some point in time, it will go away. And a better approach would be write a test which touches the code without having to use the privates. And parameterized testing can help here. There's
wouldn't it be cool if you could run a little tool and point it at it and it went and spewed out 10,000 lines of unit tests?
What about the side effects?
That's effective.
So you really should see the language designer. I thought really hard about the language, and they added this visibility concept for a reason. And now we come up with this private accessor and totally breaking their work, right? That's another way to look at it.
You could do it anyways with reflection. That was always the argument about private access is anybody could actually write the code to go in and use reflection and get at the values. The biggest reason why you don't want to do this is it couples the test to the actual underlying implementation of the class. And that means that somebody comes along later, and also since they use strings, if you change the name of a variable, a test will fail at runtime. And usually, in my experience, what happens is you get someone who comes in afterwards, change some of the code, and the tests fail. What do? They delete the tests. That's what they do.
You disable it.
Yeah.
Just disable the test to get the build running.
That's the first step.
Disable the test to get the build running.
I'm going to call time. I want to thank all the folks in the audience who asked questions. I especially want to thank our panel. Some people came in at the last minute.